After 5 years of publication, the first edition, the second edition of the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook, ABO2, was published in 2017 that provides an assessment of the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 and the Aichi biodiversity targets in the ASEAN region. Through a threats, response, and way forward framework, it discusses the state of ecosystem realms of the ASEAN member states, how these are affected by drivers of biodiversity loss, and how the AMS have stepped up to address such issues and articulated ways forward to meet the Aichi biodiversity targets. The Aichi biodiversity targets indicate that AMS have achieved significant headway, but there are gaps that present tremendous challenges to conservation effort. The analysis of action have been made to achieving the target, such as disclose to the community about a common understanding of the biodiversity. For example, its value in ecosystem services and the consequences of its loss to the ecosystem. Next, the management of the protected area must be ensured effectiveness as well as establish a functional protected area networks. The assessment indicates that AMS need to generate a greater participation to ensure the target are within reach. Lastly, Aichi biodiversity target pinpoint that the regional conservation community has expanded beyond the usual conservation support group. ABO2 consider as a call to any region that continue a large-scale deforestation, pollute rivers, and overexploit the sea. ABO2 also recognizes the need to generate greater support among the stakeholders, particularly from the business sector, that derive a significant benefit from the biodiversity. ACB will continue to facilitate programs and activities to strengthen biodiversity conservation, and ACB's Strategic Plan 2016 to 2025 will be updated in line with ASPEN and the emerging gaps and priorities assessed in ABO2. 4 discusses ecosystems. Coastal and marine biodiversity. Threats to coastal and marine biodiversity that still undervalue. Ineffective governance. The government lacks of funds and commitment to enforce laws on the irresponsible natural resource use. The gaps of education and lack of awareness about the value and importance of marine habitats. Unmanaged coastal development and restoration actions causes the losses of resources. Climate changes. Climate changes influence changes in primary and secondary productivity, the structure of marine communities, and the migration patterns. Global warming is the long-term heating of Earth's surface, increasing sea temperatures. Causes: coral bleaching, reduced available habitat, sea level rise, ice melting from land into the ocean. Pollution. Pollution in the marine ecosystem have increases the vulnerability of coastal and marine habitats and reduce their ability to recover from natural disasters. Pollution on marine ecosystems usually causes by oil, chemical spills, and trash that reduces the ecosystem health. Habitat change. Previously in ABO1, it is stated that conversion of coastal habitats to less ecologically is the main causes of threats to coastal and marine ecosystem. Coral reefs, which considered as habitats for many marine animals, are subjected to many forms of abuse such as fishing, pollution, coastal development, and climate changes. Charcoal and construction materials are harvested from mangroves, and sometimes mangroves are removed for the expansion of fish ponds and salt farm. Seagrasses are also one of the threatened plant because of the lack of the knowledge of their importance and function in marine ecosystems, just like coral reefs. Overexploitation. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing. 19% of fish caught were harvested before mature sizes, and 40% were caught without value. Harvesting of eggs and sea turtles for a long term and unsystematic can cause the turtles to go extinct. The population that resides in the coastal areas have attracted many economic activities, have resulted in the decline in biodiversity ecosystems and services. Poaching of the threatened species is not often reported due to the difficulty to identifying the losses and the lack of documentation. The overexploit of ornamental fish and shells for decorations, jewelry, and cultural event. Method to improve the situation. Adopt an inclusive and integrated approach. It is important to understanding the social, ecological, and economic dynamics of marine conservation. To ensure the sustainable use and conservation of marine resources, it is important to ensure the ecosystem management and the role of biodiversity on marine systems. To reduce threats to threatened species and maintain the ecosystem services, it is important to conserve habitats. Both proactive and responsive mechanisms should be developed by the government to provide a solution for issues and adaptation from the increasing complexity that drives biodiversity loss. Increase the coverage and effectiveness of MPAs. The MPAs is one of the approach for area-defined conservation measures and usually misinterpret to be ineffective against impacts as a buffer that occurs in larger scale. Benefits that deprived from the protected area usually linked to the activities that can be developed in the area, and the impacts outside of the protected area usually not widely publicized. The areas that have been managed by MPAs was less exposed to the pressures from the exploitation and destructive compared to the other areas. AMS also have protected over 2% of coastal and marine areas, however, it is quite minimal at global scale. Aichi biodiversity targets recommended MPAs plan to be widely used, and establishment such as MPAs need to be established particularly in the areas where the target is not yet achieved. Consider connectivity. In the study that recommended by Aichi Biodiversity Target 11, it is shown that there is a connection on the larval migration patterns that indicate that a certain areas may be a sources of fish and invertebrate larvae. To ensure the survival of fish and invertebrate larvae, the network of MPAs are needed. Migration patterns of species with the conservation of habitat that support the migration is also one form of connectivity. Another approach that emphasizes the interaction between terrestrial activities on coastal and marine habitats or the influence of marine habitats on land-based ecosystem. It is important to understand the connection of managing agricultural inputs and infrastructure development in managing coastal and marine habitats. The relevance of coastal forests and seagrass meadows in the coastal protection and disaster risk management needs to be considered. Capitalize on lessons learned. Education on coastal and marine conservation has increased for the past 2 decades. The report that AMS5NRs have stated that the project have been a good practices and be able to provide good advice for the conservation of island ecosystems, able to establish more conservation area and mangrove rehabilitation and response on the mechanisms that happen such as coral reefs bleaching. The continuous lessons collection and practices will be able to provide the access and reference to those in charge in the coastal and marine management. Improve fisheries-related policies. FAO have developed the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, CCRF, to guide and support the rational and sustainable utilization for fisheries and aquaculture. This initiative recognized as an important factor to achieve a sustainable fisheries development. The voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries is complements with the CCRF and AMS should consider to deploy and updated on sustainable fisheries management. Communicate. Various EPIC campaigns have been utilized to communicate about the importance of marine ecosystem and impacts of anthropogenic changes to the stakeholders. It is important to improve the understanding of the coastal and marine ecosystems, and to achieve that result, the effective communication skill and education would be able to encourage a community to take action. The end.